Bus is headed on this 100-day tour. There it is in its new blue color, and the students that we've been talking to are sitting on the bus when we talk to them, and they're going to have a chance now to talk with two political commentators that we're having on. First is David Sirota, who is up in our New York studio, political commentator, essayist, and his most recent book is called The Uprising, an unauthorized tour of the populist revolt scaring Wall Street and Washington. Mr. Sirota, you had a column recently saying that America is moving away from democracy. Rather intriguing. Why do you say that?
Well, what the column was geared towards was this idea of czarism. We're hearing a lot about the need to empower extra-legal figures with cross-agency powers across the federal government. And this has been a trend that has been growing, this trend towards czarism in the last 75 years. You know, Herbert Hoover was really the federal government's first czar. He was appointed by President Coolidge when he was Secretary of Commerce to deal with the flood of 1927, and Herbert Hoover then appointed a series of dictators. That's what Hoover called them. And throughout the years since then, presidents have essentially discussed or promoted the idea of appointing czars. You know, we had the drug czar. President Bush appointed an Iraq war czar. The problem is that what we're seeing now in the last couple of months are the possible appointments of czars that really usurp congressional power over the power of the purse. You saw the Congress essentially make an economic czar out of Henry Paulson with the Wall Street bailout. You've got the Federal Reserve Bank now lending out trillions of dollars without any oversight whatsoever, essentially the Federal Reserve Chairman acting as another economic czar. And now you're hearing talk about the appointment of an auto czar who would be empowered by Congress to essentially force auto companies into bankruptcy court, potentially force wage concessions on unions. And the problem with this, of course, is that the concept of the czar undermines democracy. What it's really saying is that all of the inhibitions of democracy, hearings, public input, elections, votes in Congress, these are things that are slowing us down in our economic competition. That's what this czarism is really positing. And so the way we're going to deal with this fast-moving 21st century economy is we're going to essentially subvert democracy. And the problem with that is that really, I think, undermines what this country is founded on. I mean, we are not a country of dictators, yet we are moving towards a more authoritarian kind of government.
Change in that with change in administrations?
You know, it was interesting. Dick Cheney, in the last couple weeks since the end of, since before the Obama administration took over, he said he did not expect the Obama administration to give up the executive power that the Bush administration had after 9/11 seized and concentrated in the executive branch. Now, I don't tend to trust Dick Cheney all that much, but I don't think Dick Cheney's necessarily wrong. You know, presidents like to usurp power. The question really is whether the new Congress, not necessarily the new administration, but the new Congress will protect that power. It's not yet clear. I mean, we just saw votes in the House and Senate to essentially continue that Wall Street bailout, to continue giving almost unbridled power over the power of the purse to the president. So I'm not optimistic that this is going to be turned around.
David Sirota writes a lot about money and taxpayer money. And this is, when he wrote this book, I think it came out in June of last year, Mr. Sirota, is that correct? This is called The Uprising. Right. And you can see here people in silhouette protesting, and there's pitchforks. And the peasants with pitchforks was a very familiar phrase that we learned in 1992 with Pat Buchanan. Do you think you and Mr. Buchanan have a lot more in common than you might think?
Well, I think there's a lot of potential for coalitions between the left and right. I mean, very recently, in the House yesterday, the vote to disapprove the release of the Wall Street bailout funds, it's a symbolic vote because the Senate had already rejected it. But this vote passed, and it was a group of of progressive Democrats and very conservative Republicans that had formed a sort of left-right coalition. I think on a lot of issues, that's really where bipartisanship is these days. We tend, I think, in the political sphere to sort of pervert the concept of bipartisanship. It's the concept of centrism and bipartisanship in Washington, D.C. is very different from that concept in the country at large. You know, anything that passes the U.S. Senate by 99-0, well, that's usually bipartisan, but that's usually the renaming of a post office or the passage of a corporate tax cut or the inauguration of a war. Those tend not to be what bipartisanship and centrism is outside the Beltway. You know, I think there's a lot of areas of left-right common cause on issues like trade, on issues like whether we should bail out financial firms, even on issues now like the war, whether we should be such an aggressive interventionist country in terms of our military.
Our lines are lit up. David Sirota is our guest, davidsirota.com. In case you want to go to his website, Pequot, Ohio Democrat, you're on.
Yeah, I was wanting to ask a question for Mr. Sirota concerning the bipartisanship. And do you think, like, congressmen like Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul can agree on maybe cutting military spending? Because you're, you know, trying to link maybe the two extremes from either party.
Mr. Sirota.
Well, I think there's a lot of common cause to be made on that kind of issue, on budgetary issues in general, and certainly on Pentagon spending in specific. Look, you look at recent polls that ask the public the public to essentially make up a budget on its own, and what ends up happening is the public has been looking more and more favorably on trying to reduce the amount we spend on the military. And I think that's the public at large. That's conservatives, that's progressives. Within Congress, for sure, I think you've got a potential left-right coalition between more libertarian conservatives and progressive Democrats around the issue of Pentagon spending. But I think it goes bigger. I think you've got that same coalition potentially on efforts to cut corporate welfare. I mean, we spend billions of dollars a year essentially subsidizing private interests all across the United States and all across the globe. A lot of it's wasteful spending. So I think the question will be is whether the old Washington bipartisanship, which I think is really sort of establishment politics, whether that continues to take priority over where real bipartisanship is in the United States, in the country at large.
Mr. Sirota, we have a group of students down on the C-SPAN Civics bus in Orlando, Florida, and they're at Jones High School in Orlando, and several of them came up for the inauguration, and we're going to add them into the conversation as we go this morning. And our next student is Victoria Haynes. Victoria, good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead and tell us what year you are at Jones, and then go ahead and ask Mr. Sirota the question.
I'm a senior at Jones High School, and my question for Mr. Sirota is, do you think Barack Obama has a chance of restoring a healthy middle class in America?
Why do you ask that question?
Because a lot of people with the economic crisis these days, everybody has a hard time. And like me, I'm also in the middle class, so everybody is working hard and it's getting tougher, and you know, it needs to be restored.
Are you worried about college costs?
I am actually. I don't know how I'm going to actually pay for it. I'm doing a lot of scholarships.
Good luck to you. Thank you, Victoria.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Sirota.
Well, that's a great question, and I think it's the question of the moment right now. I think Barack Obama has talked a lot about hope, and I think he's given a lot of people a lot of hope. But there's a big difference between hope and change. And the question is whether the right policies can be changed to really, as you said, restore the middle class. Now, we basically know right now what that means, what we would have to do to make that happen. We have to pass a universal health care system. We've got to create more security around people's retirement pensions. We've got to lift people's wages, and we've got to essentially restore the macro economy. I think that Barack Obama has made the kinds of policy promises that suggest change is possible. The question is whether he will now, as president, take those campaign promises and really push them forward with the presidency. The thing is here is that in order to pass, for instance, a universal health care system, in order to force employers to raise wages, you're going to have to make a lot of people uncomfortable. You're going to have to make a lot of big money interests in Washington uncomfortable. Barack Obama previously has seemed more like a politician who wants to try to make everybody somewhat happy. But I submit to you that in order to make those kinds of changes to lift the middle class, there is going to have to be somewhat of an us versus them fight. And we don't yet know whether Barack Obama is ready to have that fight. I sure hope he is, and I'm optimistic that he is, but we don't yet know.
Springfield, Missouri, Republican. You're on with David Sirota.
Yes, sir. This is Alan McQueen. Hey, my question is this. Basically, it's about contracts for the administrations, or maybe somebody can put some word out there that this is the first time that I've ever seen that when we went to a war that we've never prospered, as far as financially for America. And the way I'm looking at it, there was a time where, if for the military, if you bought stuff, military contracts, but the contracts were given to Americans, and it was produced by American companies. What's happening now is that we're getting the contracts to the Americans, but the Americans are outsourcing all the contracts for the product from other nations. And I just want to know, like in the Obama administration, or if anybody can look at it or figure something out here, that we need to.
Mr. Sirota.
Well, it's a very interesting and sad situation that we're in right now that I think the caller alludes to in terms of it's not just defense spending, it's not just war spending, it's that this is the first time in American history that we've seen corporate profits rise, worker productivity rise, and workers' wages decline. And the economy, while previous to this crisis, the macro economy, the GDP numbers were doing well, but the micro economy, in terms of what it meant for the average American, that wasn't doing well. So what it suggests is that the economy has been re-rigged, that previously there was something of a rising tides that lifted all boats. Now we've got a situation where profits and the fruits of the economy are moving higher and higher onto the income ladder, and they're not being shared among the mass public. It's a disappointing situation, but it's predictable. When you have a country where union density has gone down, where workers are less able to essentially bargain for a bigger share of the economic pie, where you have a trade policy that incentivizes the outsourcing of jobs, you're going to get an economy that is hollowed out in the middle and that essentially, again, moves most of the benefits up the income ladder.
Dayton, Ohio, on our independent line. You're on with political commentator, syndicated columnist, and author David Sirota.
Yes, I have a question about the TARP money that was allocated to these financial institutions. When a company goes into bankruptcy, say like the average Joe, you had to somewhat turn over some of your assets in your bankruptcy hearing. But what I'm gathering is some of these financial institutions get receiving this ridiculous money and this TARP money, able to turn around and give these bonuses, $70,000 rugs, et cetera, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of outcry about this thievery.
Mr. Sirota?
Well, I don't think there's been no outcry. If you look at polls that ask the public what it feels about the bailout, on a bipartisan basis, the country is incredibly opposed to the bailout as it's structured. Now, the key phrase there is "as it's structured." The caller alludes to the fact that there have been no strings attached to the money that taxpayers are being forced to spend. We just were forced to spend, by last week and this week's vote in the Congress, another $350 billion, giving away, essentially, that money to Wall Street. Now, that's $1,100 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. And the caller's exactly right. We know a lot of that money has been used to subsidize executive bonuses. Companies that have taken the money are still paying shareholder dividends. There was a New York Times story recently that talked about how companies weren't increasing lending off of that money, which is the whole objective, or at least the public objective of the TARP, was to increase lending. The companies are using that to buy up their competitors. This is really what I've referred to in some of my columns as kleptocracy. We're watching a rule by thieves. Money is literally being stolen from the taxpayer to subsidize Wall Street, which of course happens to be one of the biggest political donors to political candidates in the United States. What we need to do, in my opinion, as an American public, is demand that Congress at least put some strings attached on this money. I mean, you saw 2 weeks ago in the House the Vice Chairman of the Federal Reserve come before the Congress, and freshman Congressman Alan Grayson asked, where is the money that you're spending on behalf of taxpayers going? And the Fed refused to even tell us where our money is going, who the recipients are. That is an absolute outrage. The first and foremost thing we need is transparency. And then I think what we need to do is follow the lead of some of our industrialized nation allies like Sweden and like Britain, which when they went through a bailout of the banks, they effectively nationalized the banks, bought up shares of stock that allowed the government, gave the government the leverage to clean out the management, to stop the executive bonuses, and to essentially restructure the banks in a way that protects taxpayers and forces them, finally, to lend out the money that we as taxpayers are giving them to lend, instead of using it, again, to subsidize extravagant or extraneous things.
Isaiah Bryant is our next student from Jones High School in Orlando, Florida. He's on the C-SPAN Civics bus. Isaiah, good morning. What was the best thing about being in Washington?
Best thing about being in Washington was just being in Washington. The monuments that you got to see, the people, the experience, it was something like I've never seen before.
What are your college plans?
I plan to go to UF and major in veterinary medicine. Orlando does not have a zoo, and I plan to bring the first zoo to Orlando.
Orlando does not have a zoo?
No, but it's hard to believe, but somebody has to do it, and I hope I'm the first one to do it.
There you go. Isaiah, what's your question for David Sirota?
Mr. Sirota, I understand that you have one best-selling New York Times, and you're working on another book, and the country is obviously changing with Barack Obama. What's next for you? What's the next big push? What's the next big book that you're going to publish?
Good question. Thanks, Isaiah.
That is a good question. That's what my wife and my family have asked me over the last couple weeks and months since the election. I've have a couple book proposals out there. I've been working on my column. I've just joined as a regular contributor to openleft.com, OPENLEFT.com. You know, the writing game right now, the writing world and the journalism world is a difficult world. You've heard a lot of stories about newspapers closing up. You've heard about the publishing industry having trouble. I'm concerned about that, not just because I'm in the writing business, but because, look, the media, the press, is the fourth estate, if you will. It's part of our democracy. And so I'm really hopeful that in this time of tumultuous change politically and in the journalism world, that our democracy becomes more vibrant. And I think part of that means working in any way that I can to continue strengthening that journalism, that field of journalism.
St. Albans, West Virginia, Republican. You're on with David Sirota.
Hi, I can't believe I got through. It's a miracle. I thought maybe they had put a block on all Republicans in the South and West Virginia. What I wanted to comment about was the march on Washington yesterday for against abortion. There is an uprising, and a lot of people don't realize that there is a lot of youth, other than Obama's youth, For instance, 17,000 met in Kansas City about 2 weeks ago. The youth is rising up, and they want civil rights for the unborn. 50 million babies have been killed since 1973. Please don't cut me off. Roe versus Wade, the Freedom of the Choice Act. I just can't believe that Obama sat to church and then went back and announced he is going to go through with the Freedom of Choice Act.
About.
Well, I think the caller alludes to past movements and past uprisings that continue today, but started, I think, or became as powerful as they've become. Certainly, the anti-choice movement in the late 1970s that continue to impact our politics today. I personally am pro-choice. I don't think there's any problem or hypocrisy with Barack Obama being a church-going religious person and being a pro-choice person. I don't think there's any hypocrisy there. This is one issue, though, abortion, where there are serious fundamental disagreements. But I think what I would say to the caller is that the country has spoken over and over and over again and believes that this is a choice, however religious you see it, but this is fundamentally a choice between a woman and her doctor. And I think that through our elections, through so many elections, through so many superheated campaigns around this issue, the country has spoken repeatedly, and it has spoken clearly on this issue.
You seem to take a lot of pride in the fact that you don't live in Washington.
Well, I wouldn't say I take a lot of pride in it. I enjoy not living in Washington for a couple of reasons. The first reason is because I like to live near the mountains, and so I live in Denver. I happen to be in New York right now, but there's sort of a natural beauty issue there. Secondly, as a journalist and as a political journalist, I think it's easier to report on and tap into the pulse of the country outside of the Washington bubble. Now, that doesn't mean I think that there's no value in journalism in Washington, but there is a recognition, or there should be a recognition, that Washington and the rest of the country are often two different worlds. And so there's two different roles for two different kinds of journalists. I see myself as somebody who's trying to have a more of an outside the beltway, outside the bubble perspective. And I think, frankly, that there's not enough of that perspective in our overall political journalism, that our political journalism tends to be so Washington focused when, for instance, as just one example, you have 50 state capitals whose governments, collectively, state governments, spend in terms of discretionary money more money than the entire federal government. We don't hear very much about that. And so I guess one of the reasons I've based myself out of Washington is to try, in my own small way, to inject that kind of perspective into the broader political debate.
We have about 7 minutes left with David Sirota, a couple phone calls, and one more student. New York City. Good morning. New York, you with us?
Yes, I'm not a student.
No, right. You're from New York City. Please go ahead with your comment.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on the financial situation that the country is in, and I think the gentleman should tell the truth that the Republican Party hoodwinked the American people by playing on their fears, racism, issues that have nothing to do with economics, such as abortion, homosexuality. These are the things that the Republicans push on the people. When they had the power, they had the Senate, they had the presidency, and they had the Congress, and they changed nothing. They did nothing. All they did was just played on their fears. And I'd like for the gentleman to go ahead and tell the truth that racism played a great part because it made the white Americans feel comfortable in their racism.
Mr. Sirota.
There's a lot there, and there's a lot that I agree with there. Absolutely. First and foremost, the caller is absolutely right about that the Republicans controlled the levers of power unilaterally and completely for 6 of George W. Bush's 8 years. And they were a major reason why a lot of the regulations that were in place since the New Deal were gutted. And that helped accelerate, or in some cases create, the financial crisis and economic meltdown that we're in. That's absolutely true. What I think the caller left out is that the Democratic Party has played a role in that as well. I mean, let's not forget that the Clinton administration took huge amounts of Wall Street money and converted that Wall Street money into advocacy for some of those same deregulatory policies, some of those same free trade policies which have destroyed our economy. Now, in terms of racism, I absolutely agree that the Republican Party and the conservative movement has effectively used racism to try to distract the country from a more unified economic message. I mean, this is, Ronald Reagan kicking off his 1980 presidential campaign at the site of a race crime, and the use of quote-unquote welfare queen symbolism to essentially try to demonize and blame African Americans for the state of the economy back then not doing so well. And then the rise of racism in this campaign, whether it was Hillary Clinton trying to play the race card against Barack Obama, whether it was the Republican Party trying to play the same race card against Obama, racism still very much exists in this country, and the conservative movement and the right has tried to use it as a distraction, as a wedge issue. The good news is that I think that this election takes a step forward to ending that. It's not the only step. Racism certainly is alive and well, unfortunately, in the United States, but it's a major step.
On the C-SPAN bus at Jones High School in Orlando, Florida, Philip Thomas. Philip, what was how close were you to the inauguration when it was happening, and what time did you have to get to the mall in the morning?
Well, the time we had to get to the ball in the morning was really, it was 5 p.m. We really didn't get as close to the inauguration as planned, but we did get pretty close. We get to hear what Obama was saying, and it was just a phenomenal experience, and I wouldn't want to forget any of it in my life.
All right, what year are you at Jones? Where are you going to go to school, and what are you going to study?
I'm a junior at Jones. I want to go to University of South Florida, and I want to pursue a degree in law.
Why?
Why? Because law is very interesting to me. I want to, learn all that I can about law. I want to become an attorney. I can defend, I can prosecute, and my mother is also an officer, and her job really interests me.
Your mother is a what?
An officer.
A police officer?
Yes, sir.
All right. Philip, what's your question for David Sirota?
Mr. Sirota, I would like to know, what is your opinion of Barack Obama's policies on globalization and political corruption?
That's a big question. On globalization, Barack Obama took very strong stands, very strong populist stands against our corporate written trade policies, our policies that effectively encourage the outsourcing of American jobs. I thought that was politically smart, and I thought it was morally courageous. We don't know if he's going to put those campaign promises into action. Since the election, there's been some talk that he's not going to pursue a reform of policies like NAFTA or the China free trade deal. I sure hope he does, and I think pressure needs to be brought to bear on him to push those reforms. On corruption, look, I think this is one of the strongest areas for Barack Obama. I think he has a record of supporting public financing of elections, of supporting ethics reforms that is really, really admirable, probably the strongest part of his record. And I think his declaration on day one or day two, I think it was, trying to instill some ethics rules, new ethics rules in the White House is a great step. I have a lot of hope for Barack Obama on enforcing some kind of transparency and cleaning up Washington in a real way. That's the strongest area for him, I think.
Last call for David Sirota, Sun City Center, Florida.
Good morning.
Hi.
The previous caller basically put out the question, but I'd like to make a comment. And this was on Franklin Roosevelt. Whenever, in 1933, I believe it was his first 100 days, he put in a lot of controls on banking and the stock market. So what happened in 1929 will not happen again. And it seemed to me that it held pretty good until 1989 when the Keating Five got in with the deregulation and got deregulation. And then over a period, not just 1 year, but it took about 15 years to get into where we're at today, as far as no regulation on the banking system, no regulation on the stock market. And I think the problem really, if we wouldn't have had the Keating Five, perhaps Roosevelt's policies would have be good, just as good today as they were so many years ago. And second, this is also a comment, I think listening to Barack and what he wants to do with the infrastructure and that sure sounds like the New Deal that Roosevelt had back in 1933 and 34.
Rhoda.
Let's hope. Let's hope that it's the New Deal. I mean, what we've seen, interestingly, from the conservative movement over the last couple weeks is this ridiculous and dishonest effort to slander Franklin Roosevelt. The talking point on talk radio, on right-wing cable shows, has been that the New Deal didn't help the economy. Now, that's factually false. If you look at government data from the Census Bureau, verifiable government data, the unemployment rate during the pre-World War II New Deal, not during World War II, but the pre-World War II New Deal, the unemployment rate fell at the fastest rate in American history. It's never been matched how fast the unemployment rate dropped by then. I hope that we're going to see a New Deal from Barack Obama. I think that the economic recovery package that he's put forward with a lot of spending is not big enough, and he's devoted a little bit too much money to tax cuts. But that's where I think the Congress comes in. You're seeing a reinvigorated Congress. When Obama first brought that package to Congress, the Senate Democrats said this is not enough, this is not good enough. That's very encouraging to me. After 8 years of a Congress being a rubber stamp for the president, we now seem to be having a Congress that's more aggressive and more aggressively populist in pushing the kinds of policies that for too long have been thrown to the side for policies like deregulation.
David Sirota, davidsirota.com, openleft.com, a couple of his websites if you want to see what he's writing about and see what some of his books are about. Mr. Sirota, thanks for joining us from our New York studio. Thanks
for having me, Peter.
Next up is